All right, y'all ready? How are y'all tonight? Good, good. All right. We are continuing our study on the word seek. If you remember, for the month of March, seek the lepers or those who are undesirable. That was last week. Tonight, no, that's tonight. Next week, seek the least, those who are overlooked. And then on March 22nd, the last Sunday in this study in March, seek the land and looking at heaven. So there's our, and that'll be the last for this study. We will start a different one in the month of April. So tonight, seek the lepers. I've chosen two passages for us to look at tonight. The first one, represented on the left side of the screen, Jesus healed 10 lepers, Luke chapter 17. And then on the right side of the screen, we'll go back to Luke, the 7th chapter, and look at the sinful woman in the house of Simon the Pharisee. And that's kind of where I want us to look at for our study tonight. But for just to kind of introduce the lesson, leprosy. What comes to your mind when you hear of leprosy? Sores. Yeah. Incurable disease. And so in this period of time, biblical times, leprosy often was a death sentence. When a person was diagnosed with leprosy, that was it. That was going to be a slow, painful death. What else comes to mind? Anything else? Rot, yeah. I mean, unclean. All right, there you go. So you think of, what body parts just rot away and fall off. That's a horrible thought and horrible thing to realize that happened to people. But unclean carries a little bit different idea, doesn't it? Because what did a leper have to do when he was diagnosed, when it was evident he had leprosy? What are some things he had to do? Yes, he had to separate himself from the rest of people. And, to use the word that Calvin used, if people were to approach him, he had to cover his mouth and he had to say unclean to let them know, you don't want to come near me. And so, you think about lepers, put yourself back in that period of time, and you're in the market or you're somewhere, around people, and all of a sudden you look to your left and there stands a leper right there close to you. How does that make you feel? Well, you don't want that, do you? It's a very uncomfortable. It's people that are avoided, and what did the leper do to bring that about on himself? Probably nothing. He may have exposed himself to someone else with leprosy. And that, could be done unknowingly, or it could be done in an inadvertent way. And so we think about, in the context of our study, we're not talking about leprosy and the physical ailment. So what comes to your mind when you think of lepers, and it's not the physical disease, but it's the way we would use that word in describing other people? Let me back up. In our lesson title, it's Seek the Leper's Undesirables. So what are some things in our society today, in our time today, where a person might be shunned by everyone else? It might be one of those things that when that person is in the same area with you, it's kind of awkward, it's uncomfortable. What kind of people are we talking about? Homeless, okay? Of course, a number of us go on, at least right now we're going one Saturday a month, to a camp of homeless people. And so it's not the same there, to me at least. I'm talking from personal experience. It's not the same there with me because some of those people we know, and we've been in that area enough that it's kind of become familiar. But, you walk into the mall, and they're sitting right in the lobby. Well, those, have the doors that you go through, the airlock, and then there's another set of doors, and there's somebody sitting right there. And you take one whiff and you realize he's been drinking. That's uncomfortable. Or you're walking downtown, and we don't have it here in Summerville as much as you would in other places, because you don't walk downtown Summerville, I guess. But, you're in a larger city, you walk downtown, and there's a person, and they're asking for money. Maybe sitting on the corner. Or you're driving up the interstate. You get off the interstate exit, and there's somebody at the exit. And they've got a sign, and whatever the sign, whatever their problem is, they're telling you that. Those are uncomfortable situations. What other person, are there other groups of people that would fall into that category? All right, addicts, people with drug and drinking issues. That can be an awkward situation when you have those kind of things going on. So there's two. You could add others to that. So what should be the attitude that we have toward people like that? That's one of the things I want you to have in mind while we look at this. So let's turn to Luke 17. And starts at verse number 11. Let's just read it together down to verse 19. Luke 17, verse 11 beginning. Now it happened as he went to Jerusalem that he passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee. Then as he entered a certain village, there met him 10 men who were lepers, who stood afar off. And they lifted up their voices and said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. So when he saw them, he said to them, Go, show yourselves to the priests. And so it was that as they went, they were cleansed. And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, returned and with a loud voice glorified God, and fell down on his face at his feet, giving him thanks. And he was a Samaritan. So Jesus answered and said, Were there not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9? Were there not any found who returned to give glory to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, Arise, go your way, your faith has made you well. All right, now, one of the first things on this passage is to note where Jesus was. First of all, where was he headed? Where was he going? Jerusalem. And to get there, Luke says he had to go through Galilee and Samaria. Now, from your study of the Bible, you know that wasn't always the way people from that part of the land of Palestine, how they went to Jerusalem. And so if they're in Galilee, instead of going through Samaria, we'll cross over the Jordan River and go down on the eastern side of it in the Decapolis. And then once they got down close to Jericho, they would come back across the Jordan River and then go up to Jerusalem and entirely bypass Samaria. Now, why would they do that? To avoid the Samaritans. You remember in John 4 when Jesus went through Samaria and he stopped at Jacob's well and he talked with the woman. She was surprised that he would talk to her because he was a Jew and she was a Samaritan. And either John says it as he's writing this, or she says it herself. The Jews don't have anything to do with Samaritans. They were not lepers, but they were outcasts, and they were people to avoid because they don't have anything to do with them. This was said in jest, but I'm going to tell you what was said. I think it was last year, either last year or year before last. Micah was playing soccer at Brewer, and we went to Russellville to play. Because they were in our area, and they were really good. But their PA guy, he did a really, really good job. After the game was over, he thanked everybody for coming. He told those of us who were headed back to Brewer, we hope you have a safe trip. And then he said, and don't forget, don't stop in Lawrence County on your way home. And I thought, now that's kind of funny. But that's exactly the way the Jews were about the Samaritans. You don't want to be there. You don't want to be found in that area, so you just avoid it altogether. And so Jesus intentionally went to where these people were. And I think that's significant because while they are pushed to the margins, they're pushed to the outside, Jesus went to where they were. And I know we talked about homeless a moment ago. You know, a lot of times in larger cities, if there's going to be a visit from like a foreign dignitary, or there's something going on in the city that's really, really important, they'll go through and they'll sweep the city and get all the homeless people out of it. Why would they do that? So the important people don't have to see them and don't have to be to put up with them. And so it's really no different what they're doing than what the Jews did when they would bypass Samaria. But Jesus went there on purpose. Now, why would he do that? Why would he go through Samaria? Kind of obvious, isn't it? Because their souls matter just as much as anybody else's. And while it's difficult, and I'm not for a moment going to suggest it's not easy. I'm not going to suggest that it's not a difficult thing. When you have people in those situations, like homeless, or they're have addiction problems, or other situations like that, is the soul of that person important to God? It is. And it's just as important as my soul is. And that's the thing that we have to recognize. And so Jesus went to where they were. Now, what he told them, first of all, they made the request. They asked Jesus to heal them, which tells you that they had knowledge of him. They had heard of him, because you wouldn't just ask somebody to heal you unless you had reason to believe they could do so. And so Jesus, notice how he puts it. Verse 14, after they say, have mercy on us, he said, go show yourselves to the priest. One thing about the miracles of Jesus, it's almost always, every time Jesus performed a miracle, he does something that is not what you expect. Like in Mark chapter 2, when the man who was paralyzed and his 4 friends carried him to Jesus, and they couldn't get in through the door, so they tore up the roof and let him down to where Jesus was. And the house is full of people, and here's a paralyzed man before Jesus. And what does he say to him? Your sins are forgiven. Well, that's not what you expect to hear. But what did he do? He used that to teach something else that was important. If I can make you walk, then I also have the power to forgive. That's what he was teaching. If I can make you walk, that tells something about who I am. All right, so when he says to them, go show yourself to the priest. Why would they go show themselves to the priest? What was that all about? Yes. Yes. Because we lump leprosy as, and we think of where the fingers rot off and where you never get over it. But there were also skin diseases that were similar and looked like it, but if you got over that, you didn't have to stay in the leper colony. You didn't have to stay away from everybody. You could be restored to the mainstream of people. But they couldn't just say, hey, I'm better, I'm coming back. They had to go to the priest, and they were the ones who determined whether that was true or not. Right. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, and the priests were the arbiters to say, yes, you can return to your family, you can return to normal life. And so he said, go show yourselves to the priest. Now, here are men who had already been healed. At some point from the time they asked Jesus, have mercy on us, as they start to make the journey, they realize the leprosy's gone. And that's why one comes back to thank him. But they've already been healed. And I don't know if maybe this is an overreach, but one of the things that we have to make evident to the people who would fit into those categories today, who are considered by the majority of the world undesirables, is that you're not undesirable in the sight of God. You can still be, the homeless person in the gutter, or the addict that takes advantage of people to supply your habit, or whatever else it might be. But God still loves you. And it's hard, it's difficult. In my opinion, you can speak to this if you want to, but it's difficult to balance the recognition of that truth and the accountability that is necessary, because many times when a person is in that situation, they're there of their own making. They've done something, they've lived in a certain way that's put them there. Now, it's not always the case, and not 100% in every case is that the way it is, but people are still responsible for what they've done. And they are accountable for that and responsible for turning around and coming the other direction. But even if, a person is, homeless, or they're addicted to something, and it's 100% their fault, God still loves them. And He still wants them to be saved. And it's not easy in circumstances like that. And I know those of you who've gone to the homeless camp, you know this as well, that sometimes you go there for the purpose of helping them. And you want to give them the things they need. And then sometimes, they respond in an ugly way. And it's almost like, I'm trying to help you, and then you do this, and you act like this. But you know, sometimes people act the way they know, and that's why they do what they do, and that's why they're where they are. But I think one thing we learn from Jesus is to try to make sure that we remember that a fellow human being, regardless of the situation he or she is in, is loved by God. I remember a tract years ago, or it may have been a sermon that I was listening to, that there is no such one, there is no person who is unlovable. Everybody who's living can be loved. And you know why that's true? Because they are loved. God loves them. Now, as I look at them, I'm saying, well, I don't know if I can love that person. That's my problem, because I'm supposed to love them. But anyway, I think that's one lesson we learn from Jesus when we talk about the cleansing of the tent. A lot of times we go to this passage, we skip right through that and go to the thankfulness and the gratitude that we need to have, because only one of them was thankful. Only one of them came back to give Jesus thanks, and he happened to be a Samaritan. And Jesus pointed that out, made a point about that. Let me stop a moment. You have any thoughts you want to add to that, Calvin?
Mm-hmm. But then as we're raised, a lot of times we're still told to stay away from these kind of people. Mm-hmm. You don't want your child messing with these kind of people. Mm-hmm. It's hard to reconcile that.
Yeah.
Where is the line that you draw? Mm-hmm. You associate with these people, and maybe because of the situation they're in, they're involved in some things maybe they shouldn't be. Don't want you to have anything to do with them, but give them a pamphlet about the gospel. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying?
I do.
That's always been a hard thing for me.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going earlier about the balance between that, because it's not the orthodox way to associate with somebody who's in that condition. But we remember, and I think we need to recognize everything about it, but who did Jesus associate with? Tax collectors, sinners. And he received grief for that, didn't he? I mean, the Pharisees couldn't understand. They went to his disciples and said, "What is your master thinking? Why is he hanging around with people like this?" Now, one thing about that, he was Jesus. And I'm not, and you're not. And so we have to exercise, caution may not be the right word, but some good judgment in dealing with and in being with, if I go, I remember when I was a teenager, our Bible class teacher for a number of quarters, but one of the Bible class teachers we had was a lawyer in town. And he was trying to emphasize the importance of not jumping to conclusions and making good judgments about things. He said, if you saw me go into a beer joint and then you started telling everybody, "Hey, Robert went into a beer joint. I saw him go in a beer joint." Well, he said, "Why did I go into that beer joint?" He said, "It may have been the only way I could get in touch with somebody that I needed as a witness in one of the cases I'm dealing with." And so I went in there to talk to him about that. I wasn't drinking. Had no intention of doing that. And so if, I spend every Friday night and every Saturday night at some bar, I could say I'm there to try to have a good influence on those people. And that could be it. But if I'm there Friday night after Friday night after Friday night, what's also likely to happen? I could be influenced. Or even if I'm not, people who know me and people who see me could have an influence like, you know, he teaches one thing, but look at where he's going and where he's spending his time. When Jesus, and I use the phrase, it's kind of a little flippant phrase that people use, but when he hung out with tax collectors and sinners, what was he doing? You know, he was teaching. I mean, every example we have of his interaction with tax collectors, sinners, people that didn't live the best lives, any extended coverage we have of that, he would treat them in the way that they deserve to be treated, with respect. But he also treated them with some accountability. Like the woman in John chapter 8, the woman taken in adultery. You know, she was a pawn, apparently, it's what it appears to be, in an attempt to try to trick and trap Jesus. And those religious people who brought her to Jesus had ulterior motives. They didn't care about the law. They didn't care about the right and wrong of that situation. They just wanted to use her to try to get at him. And he treated her with respect. But what was the very last thing he said to her? Go your way and sin no more. You never see Jesus compromising on those matters. You never see him setting aside what's right. But he is also, in dealing with people, very respectful and very aware of the fact that their souls are worth what he was going to pay eventually. And so when we spend time with people like that, I think we've got to recognize those same things. That person deserves our respect, even though they may not realize it, even though they don't respect themselves the way they ought to. We still respect them because they're made in God's image and Jesus died for them. But we also there must be accountability. And Calvin, I think that's what makes it difficult to get that balance. Ruby. Mm-hmm.
Interaction with those people, and that's something too that we need to. You have to take care of yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
If this person causes you to be mentally ill as well, because it has just taken you in and just drugged you down
Mm-hmm.
so low that you have to extricate yourself
Mm-hmm.
from that person.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know what the answer is, but you've got to be able to reach out to those people
Yes.
too.
Yeah. And if you didn't hear, mental illness or mentally challenged people are often on.
Or even physically challenged.
Yes, physical disabilities.
A lot of people are avoided.
Yes.
Well, if they can't walk, that must mean they're not very bright.
Mm-hmm.
And when they could be very, very bright.
Mm-hmm.
And it's we make these judgments about people.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's definitely an area where you know, more times than not, it's not necessarily that person's fault. It's not something they did that put them in that situation. And I started to bring this up, and I think this fits with it as well. What about poverty? When I was going to Guyana, Demar would talk about how important it was that we realize that the people who were there had some dignity. Because when you look at them, there wasn't a one of them that had clothes anywhere near as nice as anything you've got on tonight. Generally, they were ragged. It was clothes that you look at and say, I need to just get rid of that. And that's what they would wear. And there was one time, and he was telling us this so that we would not make this mistake. He said there was a man who went down, and he was talking with one of the members of the church. And, you know, this man didn't have much, but he was he was very involved in the worship services, Bible class, that kind of thing. But he talked to him like he was a child. And if we're not careful, because somebody is in that state of poverty, or because there is some type of physical or mental challenge, or because, you know, they're homeless, or they're an addict, or whatever it is that's different from the mainstream, we can look down on them and treat them as if they are less than, I don't know if you can say it less than human, but at least less than, you know, the way people, less than what people are. And so we have to be careful and realize, and especially in situations like that, I may not be qualified to deal with whatever issue it is, but I can at least approach somebody like that with some respect and kindness. Yeah, and not just something that, you know, makes you feel good. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is. And it's no different than these other groups that we've talked about. David?
Well, I'll go ahead and bring up the nastiness of it, because it's when you pick one of the women went through it, basically. Black
Yes.
and white. There's people in this room that have seen outcasts and undesirables because the color of the skin doesn't match us. And that is probably one of the ugliest things that I think America has to deal with. In past cultures. And I'm so glad, you know, Mitch and I, we talked about it in the last couple of weeks. It is, to me, it's good to see that if that is, most places around here, it doesn't appear to be that, like anything like what it used to be.
Mhm.
I was growing up a lot younger. You know, you do have the interracial couples and all, and I'm not, you know, that's something it's not a matter of forcing it, but it's at least it's something that it's not just frowned upon. You know, when we were adopting Riley, that's 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And the thing that in one of our classes, I brought it up, I know some of y'all may have already heard this before, but, you know, one of the classes we went through basically listed of all the countries that everybody was adopting from, and there was Nigeria, and there was China, and there was Vietnam, and it was like, what's all the stereotypes? And, you know, you have a generation of people that, you know, all the stereotypes, you had to throw them out there, and they said, this is what you're fixing to face.
Mhm.
Thank goodness, you know, within the last 20 years, that it doesn't even seem to be an issue. It hasn't been with us, and very, very few issues, you know, has come up, something like what I guess we prepared ourselves for. But, you know, the undesirables, I mean, we could go uncomfortable with somebody that doesn't look like us.
Yes.
They can be a lot smarter than us.
Mhm.
us. But if they don't physically look like us, that can also make us feel uncomfortable. That's, you know, that's the whole idea, I think, of Jesus is the fact that Jesus has something they need. We have to talk to people regardless what they look like, how they dress, because we have something they need. Yeah, God.
Mhm.
I mean, we can't force it on them. But if we shun them, how are they gonna get it?
Exactly. Yeah, and that goes right into what Calvin was saying. And it's more than just here's a pamphlet, you know, because nothing against pamphlets. You know, they have their place. But that's almost like a cop out. You know, I don't really want to be around you, but I don't want to feel guilty, so here's a pamphlet. And we got to do better than that as well. And I didn't bring up race, and I think it's kind of good that I didn't, because I think you're right. Things are better today. It doesn't mean there's no racism in our world, but I do think things are better today than they've been in generations past. I grew up in the 60s. I know some of you are a little bit older than me, and you saw it more than I did. Thankfully, I was able to grow up in a place where it wasn't as bad as in other places, a small town in Middle Tennessee. But even then, when we went to the theater, we only had one in town, and there was one movie. And so it would get there on Tuesday night, it would play till the next Monday, then they'd switch, you know. So when we went to the movie, blacks sat in the balcony, even then, in the mid-60s. There, and that was about the only thing I remember there being any type of situation like that. But you don't see that today, and thankfully that's not the case. And even over the past 20 or so years, and it is, I mean, regardless of what we look like on the outside, and regardless of what condition we are in within our physical lives or our economic condition or whatever it might be, we all still have a soul, and that's what matters to God. All right, any other thoughts on that? We haven't gotten to the second passage. We don't have to, but I did want to kind of look at both. Flip back to Luke 7. You're familiar with the passage, I'm sure. Jesus was asked into the home of a Pharisee, and while they were there, a woman comes in. Now, that couldn't happen in our society, the way our world is, because you invite somebody to your house, somebody else can't just walk in. That's not what happened. But what most likely was the case is that these were like in a courtyard, and people from the outside could see into where you were. And a lot of times, especially with the people who were a little bit higher up in society, it was a thing that they would have people over, but others could see them. But this woman walks into where they are, and she goes to the feet of Jesus, and she begins to weep, to wash his feet with her tears. She anoints his feet with ointment. She dries his feet with her hair. And this is where the problem begins. The Pharisee, his name was Simon, he said, if this man were a prophet, he would know the kind of woman that is touching him. Where was Simon wrong other than his hard heart? Where was he wrong in that? Jesus did know her. Jesus knew who she was. I think it's 3 times in that passage we're told she's a sinner. It's evident. Everybody knows it. She's a sinner. But Jesus knew her, because he told her, your faith has saved you. Now, he also knew something else. He knew what Simon was thinking. Now, what she's done, as far as the tears, wiping his feet and all that, Jesus turns to Simon and said, I came into your house and you did not give me a kiss of greeting. That was a custom. You still see it today in the Middle East, don't you? When people meet, they kiss each other on the cheek. That's just a form of greeting. Romans 16, verse 16, what does it say? Greet one another with a holy kiss. The greeting, make sure it is the right kind of, that's what he's saying there. But Jesus said, you didn't give me that. You didn't give me water to wash my feet. You didn't anoint me with oil. All of that was simply a part of the hospitality that should be offered to a guest. And he didn't give Jesus any of that. He said, but look at this woman. She has washed my feet and kissed my feet, and here is one who has been saved from her sins. I think what he's saying is, here is evidence of a forgiven heart. Here's what it does to you when you are forgiven. Simon, you didn't do any of that. So what does that say about Simon? And here's I think, something we need to learn about or think about when it comes to the undesirables. If my heart is hard and my actions toward people like that are not in keeping with the gospel, who's in worse condition? Me or them? Now, I'm not suggesting that, somebody like that would be saved because they're mistreated by other people, but I cannot mistreat others like that and think I'm okay with God, because God is not okay with that. And so seeking these who are in that situation is something that I think we need to keep very much in mind, to realize the responsibility that God has given to us concerning that. I kind of went through that real quickly. Do you have anything you want to add to that, or anything you want to raise about that passage? All right. So, what can we do? You got 2 minutes. What can we do to reach out to the undesirables of our world today? Have to get out of our comfort zone. What is your comfort zone? It's really easy to kind of insulate ourselves, and to realize, or to fail to realize, that we're not here for 10 o'clock worship on Sunday morning, but we're here not only to do that, but also to reach outside the walls of the building, because that's where the people are that Jesus died for. David?
I think you have to understand that all your contacts are not going to turn out the way you think. Because, like the elders, we have people that show up. Sometimes they need stuff. They ask for stuff. We have to make a judgment.
Yeah.
I've been in that situation.
Yeah.
A lot of people in rooms, you have to make a judgment. Do you give them something? What do you give them? How do you give it to them?
Mm-hmm.
We try to be very wise and prudent on that kind of stuff. Because sometimes you toss that money to somebody that's going to use it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But what do? Do you err on the side of caution and always turn everybody away?
Go back to the 10 lepers. How many of them returned to thank Jesus? Only one. What about the other 9? But did he heal them? He did. All right. Next week we'll turn our attention to, I had those passages up there. The overlooked, seek the least. We'll see how we can distinguish between our lesson tonight and that one. Or we may just continue some of the same thoughts we've had this evening. I appreciate your comments tonight. If you will, take a songbook and turn to number 488. Number 488, and that will be the invitation song that Ethan leads in just a moment. To close our service, Kenny Dunaway will lead our closing prayer. If you did not have opportunity this morning to partake of the communion, that will be offered in the classroom to the left as you go out of the auditorium tonight. And mentioned some on our sick list. Chris Waldrop, who was in an automobile accident last week, underwent surgery on his ankle. That surgery went well. He's still in, as far as I know, surgical intensive care at Huntsville Hospital. Keep that family in your prayer, especially Elaine. She's been back and forth to the hospital. She's spent some long hours there. So keep them in your prayers as he continues to recover. Also, we mentioned this morning Clayton Mize. This is John Wisenant's nephew. He is back in UAB hospital. Keep that family in your prayers. Also, Gayla Krupa suffered an eye injury this past week. She'll be going back to the doctor tomorrow to see how that is. So keep her in your prayers as well. Are there others that we need to add to that list tonight? All right. A couple of things coming up. There's a sign-up sheet on the bulletin board out in the foyer. Ladies, if you are interested in going to the ladies' retreat in September in Pigeon Forge, if you will, sign up on that sheet. It will be there for a little while, but as soon as you can, if you will sign up for that, that would be appreciated. And also remember, on Sunday, the 22nd, we will be having a church eat church format, so keep that in mind. Make that a part of your plans as well. The song that's been selected for our invitation tonight raises the question, is your heart right with God? That ought to be a question that we ask ourselves regularly. Is my heart right with God? Is it what it ought to be? That regular concern is a part of good Christian faithful living. To examine our heart in view of what the Word of God teaches. Because when the heart is right with God, then that sets the stage for everything else that we do to be done in a way that pleases Him. When the heart is not right, when our motivation isn't what it ought to be, when our love for God is not what it should be, it's really difficult for the rest of our life to be what it should be. It's where it starts. It's the foundation. And so tonight as we sing this song, is your heart right with God? Give thought to that. If it isn't what it ought to be, make whatever changes you need to make. And if publicly you need to do that, we'll assist you with that tonight. If you need to come, won't you do it right now while we stand to sing?
Have thine affections been nailed to the cross? Is thy heart right with God? Dost thou count all things for Jesus but lost? Is thy heart right with God? Is thy heart right with God? Washed in the crimson flood, cleansed and made holy, humble and lowly, Christ
Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your grace and your mercy. We thank you so much for giving us this day. We had to come together this morning and again this evening